The first thing I heard when I woke up from my heart surgery wasn't, "How are you feeling, Mom?" or, "We're so glad you're okay." It was my son Michael's voice in the hallway saying, "When will she finally die already? I've got debts to pay, and that house is worth at least 800,000." The morphine made everything feel distant and dreamlike, but those words hit me like ice water in my veins. I kept my eyes closed and listened as my daughter-in-law Ashley chimed in with that sugary voice she uses when she thinks she's being clever. "Well, at least when it happens, we can finally get out of this financial mess. The gambling problem isn't going to solve itself, and your mother's been hoarding that money for years anyway." They were standing right outside my room in the cardiac ICU, discussing my death and their inheritance plans, while I was still attached to machines that were keeping me alive. The betrayal settled into my chest like a physical weight, pressing down on my ribs where they'd cracked them open just hours before. These were the people I'd raised, sacrificed for, supported through every crisis and celebration for 43 years. Michael, my firstborn, whom I'd held through colicky nights and cheered at Little League games and helped through his divorce and his addiction recovery and his bankruptcy. Ashley, who'd called me Mom for 15 years, who'd brought her children to my house every Sunday for dinner, who'd cried on my shoulder when she miscarried and let me hold her hand through fertility treatments. And here they were, standing in a hospital hallway calculating the value of my death, while I was recovering from open heart surgery. I suppose I should have seen it coming. The signs had been there for months, maybe years, but I'd explained them away the way mothers do when they don't want to face the truth about their children. The way Michael had started asking pointed questions about my will during our weekly phone calls. "You know, Mom, you should really think about updating your estate planning. Ashley's been reading about probate, and it can get really complicated if you don't have everything organized properly." The way Ashley had begun making comments about how wasteful it was for me to live alone in such a large house. "It's really not safe for someone your age, Mom. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" The way they'd both become suddenly interested in my financial affairs after I'd mentioned my investment portfolio had done well during my last physical. "That's wonderful, Mom. You've worked so hard all your life, you deserve to enjoy your money. Although, it might be smart to start thinking about gifting some of it while you're still alive for tax purposes." Ashley found this article about estate planning that says, "I'd attributed their newfound interest in my welfare to love and concern. I'd actually felt grateful that my adult children were finally showing some initiative about family planning and financial responsibility. How naive that seems now, lying here in this hospital bed with tubes coming out of my chest and monitors beeping around me while they discuss the timeline for my demise. The irony is that I'd already been planning to help them financially. Not because they deserved it, but because I'm their mother and that's what mothers do. Michael's gambling problem had resurfaced again last year, and I knew Ashley was struggling to keep their household afloat while he threw money at poker games and sports betting. I'd been considering paying off their mortgage as a Christmas surprise, maybe setting up education funds for my grandchildren. I'd even made an appointment with my financial advisor for next week to discuss the best way to structure the gifts. But lying here listening to them calculate my worth in dollars and plan my funeral arrangements while I'm still breathing, I realized something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of our relationship. They didn't see me as their mother anymore. They saw me as an obstacle standing between them and a solution to their financial problems. "The thing is," Ashley was saying, and I could hear her pacing in the hallway, her heels clicking against the linoleum, "we really can't wait much longer. The mortgage is 3 months behind, and if we don't catch up by the end of the next month, we're looking at foreclosure. Plus, Michael's bookie is getting impatient, and you know how these people can get when you owe them money." Michael's voice dropped lower, but I could still make out his words. I know. But what can we do? It's not like we can just smother her with a pillow, although honestly, at her age and with her heart condition, it wouldn't exactly be suspicious if she didn't make it through the recovery." The casual way he said it, the matter-of-fact tone suggesting my murder as if he were discussing what to have for lunch. That's when I understood this wasn't just about money. This was about how they fundamentally viewed my existence. I wasn't their mother lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life. I was an inconvenience, a delay in their plans, a financial asset that was unfortunately still breathing. I heard Ashley laugh, a sound I'd once found musical and now recognized as calculating. "Don't be dramatic, honey. We don't need to do anything that obvious. Heart surgery is risky at her age anyway. Complications happen all the time, although it would be helpful if she'd finally agreed to that DNR we keep suggesting." That's when I remembered the papers they'd brought me to sign before the surgery. They'd presented them as routine medical forms, power of attorney documents to help them make decisions if I was unconscious or incapacitated. I'd signed them without reading carefully because I trusted them, because they were my family, because I never imagined they were maneuvering me toward a legal position where they could choose to let me die. The nurse came in then, her soft-soled shoes squeaking against the floor, and Michael and Ashley immediately shifted into their concerned family member personas. "Oh, she's awake!" Ashley exclaimed, rushing to my bedside with an expression of loving worry that would have fooled anyone who hadn't just heard her discussing my potential murder. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "We've been so worried about you." Michael took my hand, the same hand he'd held as a little boy when we crossed busy streets, and squeezed it gently. "The surgery went perfectly, Mom. The doctor says your heart is going to be stronger than ever. You're going to have many, many more years with us." The sincerity in his voice was flawless. If I hadn't heard him moments before discussing his hopes for my swift demise, I would have been touched by his devotion. I looked at them, really looked at them, as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Ashley, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and her designer handbag, the handbag I'd bought her for her birthday last month because she'd mentioned admiring it in a magazine. Michael, wearing the watch I'd given him for Christmas, the expensive one he'd specifically requested because it would help him look more professional at work. They were both smiling at me with such convincing warmth and concern. "I love you both," I managed to whisper, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed earlier. It wasn't a lie exactly. I did love them, or I loved the memory of who they used to be, or who I'd thought they were. But I also understood now that love without respect is just another form of exploitation. They stayed with me for another hour, taking turns holding my hand and telling me about how they'd rearranged their schedules to be here for me, how worried they'd been during the 8-hour surgery, how grateful they were that I was okay. Ashley showed me pictures on her phone of my grandchildren at their school play, which I'd missed because of the emergency surgery. Michael updated me on his job search and asked for my advice about a potential opportunity, the way he used to when he actually valued my opinion rather than just my bank account. It was a masterful performance, and if I hadn't overheard their true feelings, I would have felt surrounded by love and support during one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. Instead, I felt like I was watching actors rehearse lines, playing the role of devoted family members while counting down the days until their inheritance. After they left, promising to return first thing in the morning with fresh flowers and my favorite magazines, I lay in the dark thinking about the 43 years I'd spent building what I thought was a family. All those years of putting their needs before my own, of sacrificing my own dreams and desires to make sure they had everything they wanted. The way I'd worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for Michael's college tuition when his father left us. The way I'd taken out a second mortgage to help them buy their first house. The way I'd spent my weekends babysitting my grandchildren so Ashley could go back to school, and my evenings tutoring them through homework so Michael could focus on his career. I thought about all the times I'd said yes when I wanted to say no, all the times I'd given money I couldn't really afford to give, all the times I'd swallowed my own needs and opinions to keep peace in the family. I'd told myself it was love, that this was what good mothers do, that family comes first no matter what. But lying there in that hospital bed, I realized I'd actually been enabling them to see me as a resource rather than a person. The next morning brought Dr. Richardson for his rounds, and I asked him about those papers I'd signed. "Oh yeah," he said, flipping through my chart. "Your son and daughter-in-law were very thorough about getting all the medical directives in order. Power of attorney for healthcare decisions, DNR instructions, advance directives. It's actually quite responsible of them to help you plan ahead like that." "Doctor," I said carefully, "could you explain exactly what I signed? I was quite anxious before the surgery and didn't read everything as carefully as I should have." His expression grew more serious as he reviewed the documents. "Well, Mrs. Patterson, these papers essentially give your son and daughter-in-law the authority to make all medical decisions on your behalf if you're unable to do so yourself. The DNR means that if your heart stops or you stop breathing, we won't attempt resuscitation. The advance directive specifies that you don't want any extraordinary measures taken to prolong your life, if your condition becomes terminal or if you're in a persistent vegetative state." I felt the blood drain from my face as I understood the full scope of what they'd maneuvered me into signing. "And if I wanted to change any of these decisions?" "Of course, that's entirely your right as long as you're mentally competent. Would you like me to have the legal department prepare new documents?" "Yes," I said immediately. Yes, I would like to revoke all of those papers and prepare new ones, and I'd like to do it today, while my family isn't here. That afternoon, while Michael and Ashley thought I was napping, I spent 2 hours with the hospital's legal counselor revising every single medical directive I'd signed. I removed their power of attorney, rescinded the DNR, and specified that I wanted every possible medical intervention if my life was in danger. I also asked for something I'd never needed before: a restriction on who could receive information about my medical condition. The counselor, a kind woman named Frida who dealt with family medical disputes regularly, didn't ask many questions, but I could see the understanding in her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson," she said gently, "if you're feeling pressured or coerced by family members regarding your medical care, there are additional protections we can put in place." "What kind of protections?" "We can flag your chart so that all medical decisions must be made directly by you, in writing, with a witness present. We can also arrange for a patient advocate to be present during any family visits if you'd like. And if you're concerned about your safety, we can involve hospital security or social services." I wasn't ready to take those steps yet. Part of me still hoped I'd misunderstood what I'd heard, that there was some innocent explanation for their conversation about my death and their financial plans. So I just had the medical directives changed and asked that no information about my condition be shared with anyone without my explicit written consent. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery and visits from Michael and Ashley, who continued their performance of devoted family members with increasing desperation as they realized I was recovering faster than expected. I watched them carefully now, noting things I'd never paid attention to before. The way Ashley's eyes would scan my hospital room, taking inventory of my jewelry and personal belongings. The way Michael would steer conversations toward my future plans and whether I'd given any more thought to simplifying my living situation. "You know, Mom," Ashley said during one visit, arranging flowers in a vase with elaborate care, "we've been thinking about what the doctor said about your recovery timeline. 6 to 8 weeks before you're really back to normal, and even then you'll need to be careful about overexertion. It just seems like it might be challenging for you to manage that big house all by yourself during your recovery." Michael nodded earnestly. "We hate the idea of you being alone and vulnerable." "What if you fell? What if you had chest pains and couldn't reach the phone? Ashley and I have been talking, and we really think you should consider moving in with us, at least temporarily. We could take care of you properly, make sure you're eating right and taking your medications." The offer sounded so reasonable, so loving and concerned. If I didn't know their true motivations, I might have been touched by their willingness to disrupt their lives to care for me, but I could hear the calculation underneath their words. If I moved in with them, they could control my environment, monitor my activities, manage my medical care. They could ensure that any future health crises played out according to their timeline and preferences. "That's very thoughtful of you both," I said, forcing my voice to remain warm and grateful. "Let me think about it. I've been in this house for 30 years, and it's hard to imagine being anywhere else. But I understand your concerns." I saw the flash of frustration cross Michael's face before he quickly covered it with understanding. "Of course, Mom. It's a big decision. We just want what's best for you." That evening, after they'd left for the day, I called my longtime friend Margaret, who'd been my neighbor for 15 years before moving to Florida. Margaret had always been a straight shooter, someone who told uncomfortable truths when they needed to be told. "Margaret," I said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you ever noticed anything about the way Michael and Ashley treat me that seemed off?" There was a long pause. "Helen, honey, are you asking me this because something's happened? Just please answer the question." Another pause, and then Margaret sighed. "Helen, I've bitten my tongue for years because you seemed happy, and I didn't want to interfere. But since you're asking, yes. I've always felt like they treated you more like a resource than a person. The way they'd call you whenever they needed money or babysitting or help with something, but they never seemed to just want to spend time with you for your own sake. And Ashley always struck me as someone who was very interested in your financial situation." "What do you mean?" "The way she'd ask pointed questions about your investments, your insurance policies, your property values. The way she'd make comments about how well you'd done for yourself and how comfortable you must be. It always felt like she was taking inventory rather than just making conversation." Margaret's words confirmed what I'd been reluctant to acknowledge. The signs had been there for years, but I'd chosen to interpret them as interest and concern rather than calculation and manipulation. Over the next week, as I continued to recover and grew stronger, I began to pay attention to things I'd been blind to before. The way Michael would go through my mail when he visited, claiming he was helping me stay organized. The way Ashley would ask detailed questions about my daily routine, my medication schedule, my grocery shopping habits. The way they'd both become intensely interested in meeting my financial advisor and my attorney. It would just be so helpful if we knew more about your overall financial picture, Ashley explained during one of these conversations. Not because we want anything from you, but because we want to be able to help you make good decisions as you get older. Financial scams targeting seniors are so common these days, and we'd hate for someone to take advantage of you. The irony of that statement was breathtaking. I was discharged from the hospital after 5 days, with strict instructions about activity restrictions and follow-up care. Michael and Ashley insisted on driving me home and staying to get me settled, which meant spending 3 hours going through my house with the intensity of prospectors looking for gold. "Mom, you really should consider updating your home security system," Michael said, examining the locks on my front door. "This neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be." Ashley wandered through my rooms, ostensibly checking to make sure everything was safe and accessible for my recovery, but I noticed her lingering in my bedroom, opening jewelry boxes and examining my personal papers with more than casual interest. "You know," she said, holding up a folder from my desk, "you really should organize all these important documents in one place. What if there was an emergency and we needed to find your insurance papers or your banking information? It would be so much easier if everything was centralized." They were mapping my assets, cataloging my belongings, and positioning themselves to take control of my life and my death. And they were doing it with such caring smiles and loving concern that anyone watching would have thought they were the most devoted family members imaginable. That's when I realized I needed help from someone with no emotional investment in preserving family harmony. Someone who could see the situation clearly and help me protect myself from people who were supposed to love and protect me. The next morning, I called my attorney, Robert Brown, whom I'd worked with for 15 years on various legal matters. Robert had handled my divorce, my house purchase, my will, and several estate planning updates over the years. He knew my family situation and had always seemed to have a good read on people's motivations. "Robert, dear," I said, "I need to schedule an appointment as soon as possible. And I need to ask that you not mention this call to anyone, including my family." "Of course, Helen. Is everything all right? I heard through the grapevine that you'd had surgery. I'm recovering well, but some things have come to light that I need to address legally. Can you see me this week?" "Absolutely. How about Thursday at 10? And Helen, if you're feeling pressured or coerced by anyone regarding legal or financial matters, please know that there are protections we can put in place immediately." Thursday morning, I told Michael and Ashley that I had a follow-up appointment with my cardiologist and would be out for a few hours. I drove myself to Robert's office despite their protests that I shouldn't be driving yet, because I needed to maintain my independence and my privacy. Robert's office was in a downtown building I'd been to Yapos many times over the years, but walking into it that day felt different. This wasn't a routine legal consultation about property taxes or estate planning. This was about protecting myself from my own family. "Helen, Robert said, settling behind his desk with my file. "Tell me what's going on." I told him everything. The conversation I'd overheard in the hospital, the medical directives they'd pressured me to sign, their sudden intense interest in my financial affairs, their suggestions that I move in with them or simplify my living situation. I told him about the way they'd gone through my house like inventory specialists and their pointed questions about my security systems and document organization. Robert listened without interruption, taking notes occasionally, his expression growing, more serious as I continued. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Helen," he said finally, "what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of elder financial abuse and potential elder endangerment. The fact that they manipulated you into signing medical directives that would give them control over life and death decisions, combined with their express wish for your death and their financial motivations, is extremely concerning. What can I do about it?" "Several things. First, we need to completely revise your estate planning documents. Your current will leaves everything to Michael and Ashley, correct?" "Yes, with trust funds for the grandchildren." "We're going to change that immediately. Second, we need to establish protections for your financial assets that prevent anyone else from accessing or manipulating them. Third, we need to create legal barriers that prevent them from gaining control over your medical care or living situation." Over the next 2 hours, Robert outlined a comprehensive legal strategy that would protect me from financial exploitation and medical coercion. We discussed changing my will, establishing new power of attorney documents that designated a neutral third party, creating a trust structure that would prevent family members from accessing my assets, and setting up monitoring systems that would alert authorities if anyone attempted to coerce or manipulate me. The goal, Robert explained, is to make it impossible for them to benefit from harming you, while also making it impossible for them to control your medical care or living situation. We're essentially removing all of their incentives for wanting you to die while protecting your autonomy and safety. What about my grandchildren? I don't want them to suffer because of their parents' behavior. We can establish separate trust funds for the children that their parents can't access or control. The funds would be managed by an independent trustee and used specifically for education, medical care, and other necessities. It actually protects the children from their parents' financial irresponsibility. I felt a tremendous sense of relief as we worked through the details. For the first time since overhearing that conversation in the hospital, I felt like I had some control over my situation and my future. There's one more thing I want to discuss, I said as we wrapped up the legal planning. I've been thinking about what I want my legacy to be, and I'm realizing that leaving everything to people who don't value me or respect me isn't the legacy I want. What do you mean? I want to leave the bulk of my estate to organizations that actually help people. Charities that support medical research, education, elder care. I want my money to go to people who will use it to make the world better, not to pay gambling debts and fun shopping sprees. Robert smiled for the first time during our meeting. I think that's a wonderful idea, Helen. And there are significant tax advantages to charitable giving that would actually increase the overall value of your legacy. We spent another hour discussing charitable organizations and legacy planning. I chose several charities that were meaningful to me: the American Heart Association, a local literacy program, a scholarship fund for nursing students, and an organization that provided legal advocacy for elder abuse victims. So just to be clear, Robert said as we finalized the documents, your new will leaves modest amounts to your grandchildren's educational trusts, a small bequest to a few close friends, and the remainder of your estate, approximately 85% of your assets, to charitable organizations. That's correct? And you're absolutely certain this is what you want? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The next few weeks passed quietly as I continued to recover and the new legal documents were prepared and executed. Michael and Ashley continued their visits and their performance of devoted family members, but I could see the increasing anxiety underneath their concern as my recovery progressed faster than they'd hoped. You're looking so much stronger, Mom, Ashley said during one visit, but her tone suggested disappointment rather than relief. The doctor said your heart function is actually better now than it was before the surgery. Michael nodded, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. That's wonderful news. It looks like you might not need as much help as we thought, although we still think you should consider some changes to make your life easier and safer. They continued to push for me to move in with them, or at least to give them more involvement in my financial and medical affairs, but their arguments were losing urgency as it became clear that I was going to make a full recovery and remain independent. 3 weeks after my surgery, I had lunch with Margaret, who'd flown up from Florida to check on me. We met at a little cafe downtown, and I told her everything that had happened. Good Lord, Helen, she said, putting down her fork and staring at me. I knew they were opportunistic, but I never imagined they were actually putting you to die. What kind of people discuss their mother's death like it's a business transaction? The kind of people I apparently raised, I said sadly. The worst part is that I keep wondering if I did something wrong, if I somehow failed them as a mother. Helen Patterson, you listen to me, Margaret said firmly. You gave those people everything you had for 43 years. You sacrificed your own needs and dreams to make sure they had every opportunity. If they turned out to be selfish and cruel, that's a reflection of their character, not your parenting. I just feel so foolish for not seeing it sooner. You didn't see it because you loved them and you wanted to believe the best about them. That's not foolish. That's human. But now you know the truth, and you're protecting yourself. That takes courage. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried and spent an hour sitting by their graves, thinking about family and legacy and what it means to love people who don't love you back. My parents had been simple people who worked hard and treated others with respect and kindness. They'd taught me to value family above everything else, to always forgive and always give people second chances. But I don't think they ever imagined a situation where family members would literally wish for your death so they could inherit your money. They couldn't have prepared me for the possibility that the people I loved most would see me as an obstacle to their financial goals rather than as a person worthy of love and respect. I realized as I sat there that changing my will wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about directing my resources toward people and organizations that would use them to create something positive in the world, rather than enabling people who had already demonstrated that they valued money more than human relationships. A month after my surgery, I was feeling well enough to resume most of my normal activities. My cardiologist was pleased with my recovery and cleared me for travel, which gave me an idea that had been forming for several weeks. I called my travel agent and booked a 3-month trip to Europe, something I'd always wanted to do but had never felt I could afford or justify. I was going to visit art museums in Paris, take cooking classes in Italy, see the gardens of England. I was going to spend my money on experiences and joy rather than saving it for people who were counting the days until I died. When I told Michael and Ashley about my travel plans, their reactions were immediate and telling. "Mom, that's crazy," Michael said. "You just had major heart surgery. What if something happens while you're overseas? What if you have a medical emergency in some foreign country where they don't speak English?" Ashley jumped in immediately. "And the expense. Mom, do you have any idea how much a 3-month European vacation costs? That money could be put to so much better use." I could see them calculating the cost of my trip and subtracting it from their expected inheritance. The thought of me spending my money on my own enjoyment rather than preserving it for them was clearly unbearable. "I appreciate your concern, Dika," I said calmly, "but I've checked with my doctor and he's cleared me for travel, and I can afford the trip comfortably. I've worked hard all my life and saved carefully, and I've decided it's time to enjoy some of the fruits of my labor." "But Mom," Michael pressed, "what if you love it so much that you decide to move there permanently? What if you spend all your money on travel and then you don't have anything left for emergencies or long-term care?" The irony of him expressing concern about my long-term care needs was staggering, given that I'd heard him hoping for my swift death just a few weeks earlier. "I think that's my decision to make," I said firmly. "I'm a competent adult, and I'm entitled to spend my money however I choose." I left for Europe 2 weeks later, and it was the most liberating experience of my life. For 3 months, I was just Helen, not somebody's mother or somebody's financial safety net or somebody's burden. I was a woman exploring beautiful places and meeting interesting people and discovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I took art classes in Provence and learned to make pasta in Tuscany and spent hours wandering through museums and gardens in ancient cities. I met other travelers, some my age and some younger, and formed friendships based on shared interests and genuine enjoyment of each other's company rather than obligation or exploitation. Most importantly, I had time to think clearly about my life and my relationships without the constant pressure of family expectations and demands. I realized that for years I'd been living according to other people's definitions of what a good mother and grandmother should be, rather than considering what would actually make me happy and fulfilled. I stayed in touch with Michael and Ashley through occasional emails, and their messages grew increasingly frantic as my trip continued. They'd apparently expected me to last a few weeks before coming home homesick and overwhelmed, but instead I was clearly thriving and enjoying my independence. "We miss you so much, Mom," Ashley wrote. "The house feels so empty without you. When do you think you'll be ready to come home?" Michael's emails focused on practical concerns. "I hope you're keeping track of your expenses and not going overboard. Remember, you're on a fixed income now that you're retired." The assumption that they had any right to monitor or control my spending was breathtaking, but I responded politely and kept my own counsel about my financial situation. When I returned home 3 months later, I was tanned and healthy and more confident than I'd felt in years. I'd gained perspective on my life and my relationships, and I was ready to implement the final phase of my plan. Michael and Ashley came to see me the day after I got back, and I could see immediately that they were shocked by how well I looked. They'd apparently been hoping that the stress of international travel would take a toll on my health, but instead I looked younger and more vibrant than I had in years. "Mom, you look—" Ashley started, then seemed to struggle for words. "Wonderful," Michael finished, but his tone suggested he found this development deeply disappointing. We spent an hour looking at photos from my trip and hearing about my adventures, and I could see them growing more uncomfortable as they realized that far from being a frail elderly woman who needed their protection and oversight, I was clearly capable of living independently and enjoying life on my own terms. "So," Michael said finally, "now that you're back, we should probably talk about some practical matters. Ashley and I have been thinking more about your living situation, and we really feel like this house is just too much for you to manage alone. Ashley nodded eagerly. We've been looking at some really nice senior living communities, and there are some beautiful places that would be perfect for you. You'd have your own apartment, but also access to medical care and social activities. And the best part is, you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a house anymore. I could see their strategy clearly now. They wanted to get me into a controlled environment where they could monitor my activities and health more closely, while also getting access to the proceeds from selling my house. That's thoughtful of you to research options, I duckily said, but I'm not interested in moving. This house is my home, and I'm perfectly capable of maintaining it. But Mom, Michael said, his voice taking on the patient tone people use with children or people they consider mentally incompetent, you have to be realistic about your limitations. You're 71 years old, you've had major heart surgery, and this house is a lot of work. What happens when you can't manage the stairs anymore? What happens when you can't drive? When and if that time comes, I'll deal with it then, I said firmly. But right now, I'm healthy and independent and happy with my living situation. I could see the frustration building in both of them as they realized their careful arguments weren't working. They'd expected to come back to a weakened, overwhelmed woman who would be grateful for their guidance and oversight. Instead, they were dealing with someone who'd clearly grown stronger and more confident during her time away. That's when Ashley made the mistake that confirmed everything I'd suspected about their true motivations. Well, she said, her voice losing its careful sweetness and taking on a sharp edge, I just hope you're not being selfish about this, Mom. You're not going to live forever, and when something happens to you, Michael and I are going to be the ones who have to deal with all the practical consequences. It would be so much easier for everyone if you made some responsible decisions now instead of forcing us to clean up the mess later. The mask had finally slipped. After months of pretending to be concerned about my welfare, she'd revealed that their primary concern was minimizing their own inconvenience when I died. Michael shot her a warning look, realizing she'd said too much, but the damage was done. What Ashley means is that we want to help you plan ahead so that everything is organized and simplified for your peace of mind. No, I said quietly. I think Ashley said exactly what she meant. She's worried about the inconvenience my death might cause her. The silence that followed was deafening. Ashley's face flushed red as she realized what she'd revealed, and Michael looked like he wanted to disappear into the furniture. Mom, that's not... Ashley started, but I held up my hand to stop her. I think this conversation is over, I said calmly. I appreciate your concern for my welfare, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my life and my living situation. They left shortly after that, and I could hear them arguing in hushed tones as they walked to their car. I watched from my window as they sat in the driveway for several minutes, apparently having an intense discussion about how to salvage their strategy. That evening, I called Robert Brown and told him about the conversation. It sounds like they're getting desperate, he said. They probably thought your trip would either kill you or convince you that you needed more help, and when neither of those things happened, they're running out of options. What do you think they'll try next? Hard to say. They might try to involve other family members or friends to pressure you. They might try to convince a doctor that you're mentally incompetent. They might even try to manufacture some kind of emergency that would justify moving you into a care facility. Can they do that? Not legally, not without clear evidence of mental incapacity or immediate danger, but families sometimes try to manipulate situations to create that evidence. You need to be very careful about any medical appointments or assessments they try to arrange, and make sure you have independent medical and legal advocates who aren't influenced by them. Over the next few weeks, Michael and Ashley's visits became less frequent but more intense. They would show up with printed articles about seniors being victimized by scams or injured in home accidents. They brought pamphlets from senior living facilities and pointed out features that would be perfect for me. They suggested that I should have a comprehensive medical evaluation to establish a baseline for my recovery. Everything they suggested sounded reasonable on the surface, but I could see the manipulation underneath. They were trying to build a case that I was vulnerable and incompetent, laying the groundwork for some kind of intervention that would give them control over my life and assets. I decided it was time to let them know that their inheritance expectations were not going to be met, but I wanted to do it in a way that would reveal their true character once and for all. I called them both and asked them to come over for dinner on a Sunday evening in late November, about 6 months after my surgery. I told them I had some important things to discuss about my future plans and wanted their input on some decisions I was making. They arrived promptly at 5 o'clock, both dressed more formally than usual and carrying flowers and wine. I could see the anticipation in their faces. They clearly thought this was going to be the conversation where I finally acknowledged my limitations and asked for their help managing my affairs. I made Michael's favorite pot roast and Ashley's preferred dessert, and we spent the first hour of the evening talking about family news and holiday plans. They were both on their best behavior, attentive and charming and full of loving concern for my well-being. After dinner, I served coffee in the living room and told them I had some things to share with them. I've been doing a lot of thinking during my recovery and my trip again, I began, about what I want the rest of my life to look like and what kind of legacy I want to leave. Michael leaned forward eagerly. That's wonderful, Mom. We've been hoping you'd be ready to have these conversations. I've made some decisions about my estate planning that I want to share with you, I continued. I've revised my will recently, and I think you should know what changes I've made. Ashley practically vibrated with excitement. Oh, Mom, that's so responsible of you. We know how hard it is to think about these things, but it's really important to have everything organized. I've decided, I said carefully, to leave the bulk of my estate to charitable organizations. The silence that followed was profound. I could see them processing what I'd said, trying to understand if they'd heard me correctly. What do you mean by the bulk? Michael asked slowly. I mean approximately 85% of my assets will go to charities I've chosen. The American Heart Association, literacy programs, nursing education scholarships, and organizations that help elder abuse victims. Ashley's face went completely white. Elder abuse victims? Yes, it's a cause that's become very important to me. You'd be surprised how many elderly people are mistreated by their own family members. Michael's composure cracked first. Mom, you can't be serious. After everything we've done for you, everything we've sacrificed to take care of you, you're going to give our inheritance away to strangers. Your inheritance? I asked quietly. I wasn't aware that my money belonged to you. Ashley stood up abruptly, her carefully maintained facade finally crumbling. This is insane, Mom. You're not thinking clearly. People don't just give away their life savings to charity when they have children and grandchildren who need that money. Need it for what? I asked. To pay gambling debts? To fund shopping sprees? To solve financial problems caused by irresponsible choices? Michael's face flushed red. That's not fair, Mom. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone goes through difficult periods. We're your family. We're supposed to be able to count on each other. You're absolutely right, I said. Family members should be able to count on each other. They should be able to count on love and respect and support. They should be able to count on being valued as human beings rather than as financial resources. What are you talking about? Ashley demanded. We love you. We've always been there for you. Have you? I asked. Were you there for me when I was lying in the hospital recovering from heart surgery and you were in the hallway discussing when I would finally die so you could inherit my money? The color drained from both of their faces. Michael opened his mouth and then closed it again, looking like a fish gasping for air. I don't know what you think you heard. Ashley began, but I cut her off. I heard you, Ashley. Tell my son that at least when I died, you could finally get out of your financial mess. I heard Michael say, when will she finally die already? I've got debts to pay and that house is worth at least $800,000. I heard you discuss how convenient it would be if I didn't survive the recovery and how helpful it was that you'd gotten me to sign a DNR. Ashley sank back into her chair, her face crumpling. Michael stared at me with a mixture of shock and something that looked almost like fear. We didn't mean... Michael started. You didn't mean for me to hear you, I finished. But you absolutely meant what you said. You meant every word of it. Mom, you don't understand the pressure we've been under, Ashley said, tears starting to flow. The mortgage, the gambling debts, the kids' expenses. We've been drowning financially, and we just thought... You thought what? That my death would solve your problems? That my life was worth less than your debt payments? Michael finally found his voice. It wasn't like that, Mom. We love you. We were desperate, and we said things we didn't mean. Which part didn't you mean, Yes? I asked. The part where you hoped I would die, or the part where you calculated the value of my house for your inheritance planning? Neither of them could answer that. Let me tell you what else I discovered, I can tell you. I continued. I had a lawyer review those medical directives you helped me sign before my surgery. Do you know what they said? Ashley looked like she might be sick. They gave you complete control over my medical care, including the authority to refuse treatment that might save my life. You maneuvered me into signing documents that would let you legally kill me by withholding medical care. That's not, Michael protested, but I held up my hand. It is exactly what you did. And when I revoked those documents and changed my medical directives, you became increasingly desperate to find other ways to control my life and my assets. I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a folder of documents. This is my new will, I said, placing it on the coffee table between us. Your children will receive modest educational trusts that you cannot access or control. A few close friends will receive small bequests. Everything else goes to organizations that actually help people instead of exploiting them. Ashley was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks. Mom, please. We can change. We can do better. Don't punish the grandchildren because of our mistakes. I'm not punishing anyone, Ricie, I said calmly. The children are, provided for through their educational trusts. But I'm not going to reward people who wished for my death by leaving them my life savings. Michael's shock was transforming into anger. This is vindictive and cruel, Mom. We're your family. We made mistakes, but we deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness and financial reward are two different things, what I replied. I can forgive you for wishing I would die. I can even understand that desperation makes people say and do terrible things, but I don't have to pretend that your behavior hasn't fundamentally changed how I see our relationship. So that's it? Ashley asked bitterly. One overheard conversation and you're disowning us? It wasn't one conversation, Ashley. It was years of treating me like a resource instead of a person. It was manipulating me into signing legal documents that would give you control over my life and death. It was seeing my recovery from major surgery as an inconvenience to your financial timeline. I sat back down and looked at both of them carefully. For 43 years, I put your needs before my own. I sacrificed my dreams and desires to make sure you had everything you wanted. I worked extra shifts to pay for college tuition, took out loans to help you buy houses, spent my weekends babysitting so you could pursue your careers. I gave and gave and gave because I thought that's what love looked like. Michael started to interrupt, but I continued. But I realize now that all that giving didn't teach you to value me. It taught you to see me as an unlimited resource. You learned to see my love as something you were entitled to rather than something you needed to earn or reciprocate. That's not true, Ashley protested. We appreciate everything you've done for us. Do you? When's the last time either of you called me just to see how I was doing, not because you needed something? When's the last time you invited me to spend time with you because you enjoyed my company, not because you needed babysitting or financial help? They looked at each other, and I could see them trying to remember instances that would prove me wrong. The fact that they had to think so hard about it proved my point. The money isn't really the issue, Giraud, I continued. The money is just a symbol of the respect and value you never learned to have for me as a person. You see me as someone who exists to serve your needs and solve your problems, and when I'm no longer useful for that purpose, you'll be relieved when I'm gone. Mom, that's not fair, Michael said desperately. We do love you. We do value you. You love what I can do for you, I corrected. You value what I can give you. But you don't love or value me as an individual human being with my own needs and desires and dreams. Ashley wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. What can we do to change your mind? How can we prove that we've learned from this? I considered her question seriously. I don't think you can, I said finally. Things can't be undone. You can't unhear the conversation where you discussed my death as a solution to your financial problems. You can't undo the legal documents you tricked me into signing. You can't pretend that your primary concern during my medical crisis was my well-being rather than your inheritance timeline. So you're just going to cut us out of your life completely? Michael asked. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I said. You're welcome to visit, to call, to be part of family gatherings. But our relationship will be different now because I understand what it really is. I won't be your financial safety net anymore. I won't be your emergency babysitter or your personal bank account. I'll be your mother, nothing more and nothing less. But the inheritance, Ashley began. The inheritance was never yours, I said firmly. It was money I earned and saved, over the course of my lifetime. I have the right to decide what happens to it, and I've decided to give it to people who will use it to help others rather than to enable gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. They sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing the reality that their financial rescue plan had not only failed but had backfired spectacularly. Finally, Michael spoke. "Is there anything that would make you reconsider?" I thought about his question. If you could bring back the mother who believed her children loved her for who she was rather than what she could give them, then maybe. If you could undo the moment when I realized that my own son was hoping for my death, then perhaps. But some knowledge can't be unknown, Michael. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Ashley made one last attempt. What if we paid you back every penny you've ever given us? What if we got financial counseling and proved we could be responsible? It's not about the money, I said sadly. It's about the fact that you were planning my funeral while I was fighting for my life. It's about the fact that you see my continued existence as an obstacle to your financial goals. Money can't fix that kind of fundamental disrespect. They left that evening defeated and shaken, and I didn't hear from them for several weeks. When they did finally call, their tone was different, more distant, more formal. They seemed to understand that the dynamic of our relationship had permanently changed. I spent that Christmas alone for the first time in 43 years, and it was one of the most peaceful holidays I'd ever experienced. I volunteered at a soup kitchen, attended a beautiful Christmas Eve service at my church, and read books I'd been wanting to read for years. I felt free from the exhausting performance of being the perfect mother and grandmother, free from the constant anxiety about whether I was doing enough for people who would never see it as enough. On New Year's Eve, I sat in my living room with a glass of champagne and reflected on the year that had changed everything. I'd survived heart surgery, discovered the true nature of my closest relationships, traveled across Europe, and completely restructured my life and legacy. I'd learned that love without respect is just another form of exploitation, and that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is to stop enabling their worst impulses. In January, I received a letter from the American Heart Association thanking me for my planned gift and telling me about the research it would fund. I got updates from the literacy program about children who were learning to read with help from my donation. The Nursing Scholarship Fund sent me photos of students who would be able to pursue their education because of my contribution. Each of these communications filled me with a satisfaction I'd never felt when giving money to Michael and Ashley. These organizations were using my resources to create something positive in the world, to help people who genuinely needed assistance, to build a better future. My money would be part of medical breakthroughs and educational opportunities and community support systems that would continue long after I was gone. That's the legacy I want. Not children who remember me as a source of financial support, but contributions to causes that will help other people for generations to come. Michael and Ashley still visit occasionally, and our relationship has settled into a new pattern. They're polite and respectful in a way they never were before, when they took my love and support for granted. They don't ask for money anymore, and they don't try to manipulate me into making decisions that benefit them. I think they've finally understood that I'm a person with my own agency and my own priorities, not just a resource for them to manage and exploit. It's a sadder relationship than what I'd hoped to have with my adult children, but it's more honest than what we had before. I've made new friends through my volunteer work and my travel experiences, people who enjoy my company for its own sake rather than because of what I can do for them. I've discovered interests and talents I'd never had time to explore when I was busy being everyone else's solution to their problems. Last month, I turned 72, and for the first time in decades, I celebrated my birthday by doing exactly what I wanted to do. I took a painting class, had lunch with my friend Margaret, and spent the evening reading a novel I'd been looking forward to. No one asked me for money, no one needed me to solve their problems, no one treated me like a burden or an inconvenience. It was the best birthday I'd had in years. I know that Michael and Ashley will probably never fully understand why I made the choices I did. They'll probably always see me as cruel and vindictive for punishing them by changing my will. They can't see that I'm not punishing them. I'm finally choosing to value myself the way I should have been valued all along. The truth is, I don't regret my decision. I regret that it took me 71 years and a near-death experience to learn that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just exploitation wrapped in family obligation. I regret that I spent so many years enabling people to see me as less than I am. But I don't regret choosing to leave my money to organizations that will use it to help others rather than to people who saw my death as a solution to their problems. I don't regret refusing to reward people who manipulated me into signing documents that would give them control over my life and death. Some people might say I'm bitter or unforgiving, but I prefer to think of myself as finally awake. I spent decades sleepwalking through relationships that were fundamentally unequal and unhealthy, telling myself that this was what family love looked like. Now I know the difference between being loved and being used, and I'm not willing to settle for being used anymore. My new will is locked away in Robert's safe, and I sleep peacefully at night knowing that when I die, my resources will go toward making the world a little bit better, rather than enabling people who never learned to appreciate what they had while they had it. That's not revenge, that's justice. And sometimes justice is the most loving thing you can do.